Hey, y'all, I'm Bud Elliott, and this is Cover 3 College Football Summer School. We've done our research on the teams, and now we're bringing on the top team experts from the 24/7 Sports Network to help us fill in the blanks. Please follow us on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast. That's Cover 3 Podcast. And leave us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify. All right, class is in session. Hey, guys, welcome back in to Summer School with Bud Elliott. I'm here with Bryce Koon, who covers all things Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets for GoJackets on the 24/7 Sports Network. Bryce, man, thanks for joining us.
Appreciate it, bud. It's first time, but man, I'm excited to talk with you today.
No doubt. And I think this is the first one we've done where we actually came up with a name for this series. Before, I was introing them with the name TBD, and now we're calling it the Cover 3 College Football Summer School. And I don't hate the name. So
I like it.
Hopefully, it's a little better than what we had. Speaking of maybe being better than what you had, maybe not a great segue. 3-9 last year for the Yellow Jackets, power rated. I think FPI and SP Plus had a 96th on average. Just not really what Georgia Tech fans were hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you hit the nail right on the head. Not what the fan base is looking for, and I think the biggest thing, Bud, with this is that the expectations going back now 4 years ago, bringing Jeff Collins into the mix, it was supposed to be a lot higher. I mean, the marketing, the branding of the school, which, don't get me wrong, was needed. Switching from triple option to the new age, coming into the new age of college football, they needed that. Now it's the results that have been lacking, and so there is a little bit of I'll say this: there's a big divide in the fan base. Some still believe. Some really equate that COVID year as a big misstep in the maturation process of this roster. But then a lot of people are like, it's year 4. We want results. And I think the biggest part of that, and you covering college football, where Georgia Tech's situated, really kind of the college football capital of the world in Atlanta. And you're sandwiched in between two of the biggest programs in the country, Georgia and Alabama. The drive, the need for results for that fan base, which is a hungry one, it's definitely there.
It's interesting you bring up that COVID year, and I was going through the previous year's results this morning before this, and I was like, man, I really don't know how to evaluate the job Collins has done in totality because of the fact that they were switching from the triple option. I mean, the recruiting has been disappointing relative to the expectations of recruiting because Jeff's staffs had recruited well at prior stops, and I wasn't one of those guys that thought, hey, they're going to challenge Georgia on kids very often. I just figured, hey, can they challenge like a South Carolina or some of the schools that kind of get Georgia's seconds, right? Can they get enough of those dudes when the academics fit to get there? But the COVID year, I mean, do you think this is more of a 5-year type rebuild rather than a 3-4 due to the triple option switch and the COVID switch?
I'm in the camp that does believe that. And I think the biggest thing for it is because obviously COVID knocked out a year when you started a true freshman quarterback. I mean, that first game, Georgia Tech versus Florida State, Jeff Sims does a great job. I mean, I don't want to say they won despite him sometimes that season, but he's a freshman. He showed flashes, but he also showed what an 18-year-old freshman is going to do at the highest level of college football. But I think for other things and just trying to install new ideas, when you're having to do that over Zoom, I mean, you and I have sat in enough Zoom meetings talking with people. Imagine trying to install new schemes, learning something completely new. I think that really did throw these players off, and I think it's something that fans, while there is obvious frustration, yeah, you probably should have still won more than 3 games. Losing to the Citadel is never a good thing. But I think that when you have this, it's an excuse they can go back on. But, he was given a 7-year deal, and that was one thing that Todd Stansbury said at the beginning. This is not going to happen in 2, 3, 4 years. But I think year 4 is very pivotal, even with the COVID year, that you kind of just wash it all out. I mean, in my opinion, there were some good things, there were some bad things. And 2021 was something that I think there were higher expectations, and those still didn't meet, which has turned up the hot seat a little bit.
And, so here's where I kind of have some real questions about this year's team. Like you mentioned, you still believe it's a long-term process. I think it almost has to be a long-term process. But some of the departures that they had, either via guys who are out of eligibility, That's not really a choice. But losing guys, like a Jahmyr Gibbs and some of those from an offense that was 83rd overall in power rated last year, 64th in rushing, 96th in passing, and now they lose 3 of their top 4 pass catchers by yardage. They lose some offensive linemen too, but I'm almost more willing to write that off because I feel like some of those linemen were not that great.
Yeah.
But is there any way this offense is actually better?
I posed this question on our boards the other day, and I said, just because you have returning experience doesn't necessarily mean it's always going to be a step above. And I think we figured that out last year. 2021 was a year where there were a lot of guys returning on the offensive line. And just to stay there for a second, I think that this year, to me, and this is what I believe, the guys that they've recruited with Brent Key, I thought the talent was better at the freshman and sophomore level. Those guys just weren't ready to play major college football. Maybe it's due to a strength and conditioning aspect. Maybe it's due to the knowledge of a blocking scheme at the college level, which is way different than what they did in high school. I think the talent is going to get there, but it's younger. It's just a younger group. And, they added some transfers, the kid from Clemson, kid from Alabama, that are going to be, I think, good spots and good guys to have there. But when you talk about losing a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, I just said that, and every single Georgia Tech fan listening and watching this just threw up in their mouth a little bit, because that is just kind of the crown jewel of what they were able to pull in. And he's in Alabama. And to me, I haven't looked at a ton of the odds, Bud, but I mean, he's a guy that is going to be in the Heisman conversation all the way until we get to the season. I mean, he's going to be one of those guys in that offense.
I know we did our all transfer team on Cover 3, and he was actually the pick over Zach Evans to be on the national all transfer team.
Yeah, and so you lose a guy like that created opportunities for himself in spite of a faulty offensive line. This is a team that offensively, I think that they feel like they're getting better. And I think the biggest thing for me last year, watching this team in every single game, was the lack of an identity. And so the bringing in Chip Long, which to, major Power 5 teams, that's not the sexy hire. But for a team like Georgia Tech, they can look and say, okay, the 1 year at Tulane, that we're going to throw that one away. But going back to what he did at Notre Dame, if Georgia Tech can somehow just find an identity and be able to recruit players to that identity, which is under the previous offensive coordinator regime, I don't think that was quite truthfully, I don't know if that was really kind of the process. It didn't feel like that. It just kind of felt like it was just, pick something out of a hat at some points because there was so much struggle. And I think Chip Long, for better or for worse, is going to stick to an identity that he's trying to bring in as a philosophy to this offense. And we'll see. I mean, they've got some pieces that even some of the fans have never heard of. Like you talked about, when you lose some guys, some returning talent like they did, you're going to have to get some key contributions from some guys that maybe you don't know right off the roster sheet in the depth chart. But we'll see. I mean, time will tell, but I think there are reasons to be optimistic just because at least you're going to have a philosophy that this is our identity as an offense. I don't think that was there before.
Got it. So potential for the offense to be better if the O-line, the young guys mature, you minimize the drop-off of what you lose in skill positions, you get offensive identity, and Sims takes a leap as a thrower. The other side of the ball, though, is a little more concerning to me in some areas. And I may be wrong on this, so I'm really glad we have you on. I pick your brain on this for summer school. So 103rd overall last year, 61st in rushing efficiency allowed, 125th, though, in pass defense. And then I scroll down here, and all 5 defensive backs who had more than 350 snaps are gone. That may not be a bad thing, given that they were 125th in pass defense, but it doesn't make me feel great.
Yeah, that's been another hot topic all off season so far about this. Is going back to it, returning production does not always equal you're going to be better. And I think that fans are glad to see a welcome sight. They added through the transfer portal with this. They've got some young guys. They got a high impact guy in Jalen Marshall, a 4-star recruit they were able to flip from Arizona State. So I think they're taking steps, and they have the new hire in Georgia Tech, guy Travaris Tillman. So there's a lot of different things that it's just new. And I think that's what people want to see, just something new. Because like you said, I think the nightmare scenario occurred for this program where you switch offenses from the triple option to more modern day spread type of offense. You expect your defense to help carry the load while the offense continues their turn. Well, last year was the culmination of a nightmare scenario. Your defense not only was bad, but you just threw the numbers out, like historically bad for Georgia Tech defenses. They weren't able to do that, and so the wheels fell off. And so when you go back to that secondary, like you said, losing those 5 guys, Wesley Walker goes to Tennessee, a couple guys just leaving, Wanye Thomas, Tariq Carpenter, and Trey Swilling.
Yeah.
To me, all of those guys are great stand-up individual guys. Would want them to be a face of your program when you take them to media day. But when it comes to playing on the field, I think that there's some guys that can make an impact. But like you said, it's a bunch of unknowns. And so what do we know? We may not know right now what we don't know about this team. And so you would say by the numbers, it can't get much worse. But we'll have to see.
Yeah.
Literally, numbers-wise, it cannot get much worse. But I think that's something that, one thing they did this offseason, Bud, is they actually had a cornerbacks coach and a safeties coach. They're done with that. They went straight to a DB's coach in hopes of communication-wise, it'll help. The last 2 games of the season, they got outscored 100-0 by Notre Dame and Georgia. I mean, it was 55 and 45-0. If you go back and watch those, which not a lot of Georgia Tech fans want to do, or just college football fans because it wasn't pretty football, if you go back, you see a lot of busted coverages where it's just communication, not athletic ability. All these guys are great athletes, but just plain communication, not knowing where to go. And I think that was a point of emphasis in spring ball, you have to know your job, so then you can play free.
You don't want to use the quit word, but like in those 2 games, it was like this is some of the buy-in level did not look great. I did watch some of the Notre Dame game. I did not watch the Georgia game. But yeah, those were a tough look. Last one here, and I'll get you out. The level of drop off you're expecting a defensive line with Ivy transferring out and Brooks and Griffin leaving as well.
Defensive line, the biggest thing for that is if your secondary is struggling, maybe you can have a defensive line that can force pressure and alleviate some of the concern in the secondary. And I think that's going to be something we have to just kind of maintain. They add a defensive lineman, experienced guy, Morris Joseph, out of Memphis through the transfer portal. They're trying to add some pieces. And I'll tell you this, talking with some people close to the program, the idea is that they are still going to hit the portal hard. There's still about 10 to 11 spots open that they know of right now. And as we know, this is unprecedented. I always equate it for baseball fans. It's like when your favorite team goes to the waiver wire right after spring training. After spring ball, I think there's going to be another influx of portal where guys are making decisions. And I think Georgia Tech's going to have to be heavily involved because you lose a guy like Brooks on the interior that, the stats don't stand out, but he was a veteran leader and a disruptor, able to help in the run defense. Then your 2 guys on the end, and Jordan Dominic and Jared Ivey. Dominic, obviously a veteran, but Jared Ivey, I think it was more, and this is a high character guy, high motor guy. I think he's going to do some things at Ole Miss this year as maybe a rotational pass rusher and kind of get onto the scene where that might not would have happened because of all the attention was going to be directed on him this past season if he would have stayed at Georgia Tech. So those are 2 key pieces and 3 key pieces that you're losing. They're going to have to find ways to fill that. They're still looking in the portal. I know that. And so I think they're going to be heavily involved. I don't know. It's not like NFL free agency where there's a Von Miller out there sitting on the free agency market. It's going to be by committee. They're going to have to find some different options and weapons to go with and get creative. New defensive line coach, David Turner, working alongside, Larry Knight. It's going to be interesting to see how they get creative with some of their, blitz packages and what they want to do.
Awesome. Well, we will stay tuned to GoJackets. Bryce_Koon on Twitter. Bryce, really appreciate you joining us here on the Cover 3 podcast, College Football Summer School Edition. Talk to you soon, bud.
Appreciate it, bud. Thank you, man.
Hey, guys. Pleased to welcome in Stephen Bailey of Syracuse on 24/7 Sports. You can follow Stephen at Stephen with a PH. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see the spelling. If you're listening to us on your favorite podcast app, we appreciate that as well. So at Stephen with the PH _Bailey1. Follow Stephen's work for a long time. As you guys know, I'm kind of a native ACC dude back to the old SB Nation days. And I don't think anybody does a better job of covering Syracuse sports, and particularly a guy who enjoys football, right? There's so many folks who cover Syracuse who love the basketball side. And I think that's a part of the job, man. But I love how you geek out on the Syracuse football because that's where I go for my Syracuse coverage.
Yeah, I mean, when you've been doing something long enough, it just takes up so much of your brain space, you almost can't get it out. But it's fun, and it's fun to connect with, the other people who, follow Syracuse football in the spring, in the summer, when, obviously, like you said, most of the community here is pretty focused on hoops, except for 12 weeks in the fall.
No doubt. All right, so Syracuse, not to look back too much, but we kind of have to have some kind of baseline for this discussion. 5-7 in 2021. They were about 80th or so if you kind of average out the major power ratings. Connolly's SP Plus, FPI, et cetera. Pretty brutal finish down the stretch, losing to Louisville, NC State, and Pitt by a combined 118-34. I think I eyeballed it. What is sort of the mood there as we go into another year?
Well, it's interesting. I think there was a ton of disappointment at the end of the year because if you go toward the middle of the schedule, they lost some really close games. I mean, if you're talking advanced metrics, they should have beat Wake Forest. And there was a lot of, in-game decision-making and minutia, second-guessing that kind of went with that. And, by the end of the season, the passing game was defunct. The offensive line ran into health issues and, people were down. I will say there's some new life in the team in the spring. And I get that that's like inherent to spring practice. This is the time for optimism where ones crush twos and everyone looks good and that kind of happens. But you got a new offensive coordinator in Robert Anae from Virginia, Jason Beck, the quarterback's coach, and those guys have, I think, instilled some belief that Syracuse can have a balanced offense. They can have a passing game. Sean Tucker won't have to go up against 8-man boxes constantly throughout the season, and they're still dialing up the same run calls and getting 3rd and 8 and punting. They think that there's a path to being a better team and having an offense that can match this defense. I think particularly the receivers and the quarterbacks, I've noticed that. Talking about the offense opening up a bit, having more options, more motions, more for a defense to think about. Obviously, they were running kind of a version of the veer and shoot under Dino Babers and Sterling Gilbert. Before that those players thought was maybe a little bit more limited and a little bit more predictable. But again, those are the words you kind of are used to hearing in spring. But just talking to the guys, they believe they can be better in 2022.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this team. And for listeners at home, if you don't know, Sean Tucker is a dude at running back. One of my main goals on Cover 3 is to not talk playoff all the time and to talk other schools. And there's a lot of really interesting teams to follow in this sport. And they stacked the box against him all the time, and he still had a pretty awesome year. Syracuse 33rd in rushing success rate last year, but 115th in passing success rate. And that's kind of where – so Garrett Schrader's back. I'm correct to assume he's going to be the guy unless they get a transfer in, I think?
I think it's likely. Yeah, I mean, they brought in Dan Villari, a Michigan transfer, who was the 3rd stringer there. Right now, I think redshirt freshman Justin Lamson is the number 2 guy. He might get a chance to push Schrader, but Schrader's the odds-on guy to start week 1.
I'm interested in this because if you look at Robert Anae's career, you go back to what he did at BYU, they were fairly QB run heavy. And last year at UVA, not so much with Armstrong. They really did a tremendous job of using the full field, and they put guys in a lot of different positions. But you had a trigger guy in Armstrong who's pretty good. In your estimation, how is this going to look? Because Schrader is not, I don't want to dog the kid, but he's not known for his passing at this point in his career, right? I mean, he's more of a rusher than he is a thrower so far, it seems.
Yeah, his last year at Mississippi State, he got moved to wide receiver. So he's and he's certainly someone who has a chip on his shoulder about that. He does not like to be told, that he would not, be a good quarterback. But yeah, I mean, there's accuracy questions. You look at a guy who was basically had just as much production yard-wise as a runner last year than a passer, and certainly many more touchdowns. I mean, he's among the most productive rushing quarterbacks in the country last year. So how much better can he be? I think, he kind of needs to prove that to everybody. I haven't seen anything in the past from an accuracy and I guess arm talent standpoint that makes me think, they'll be able to win with him slinging the ball all over the place. But I think when you compliment him with Sean Tucker, we saw last year that even without a passing game, they were still able to do a lot on the ground. Sometimes it looks triple option-y. You got, lead blocker going left and the flow of the line going right, trying to maybe isolate a defender who you think you can win one-on-one against, defensive ends or outside linebackers. So I think we'll see more of that. But yeah, I think Robert Anae and Jason Beck have their work cut out in terms of developing a passing game that's going to match this, because you look at the receiving core and there's no one who is like clearly ready to produce at a high level in the ACC. Taj Harris transferred out midway through last year after the kind of shift from Tommy DeVito to Garrett Schrader and from balanced to run heavy. They haven't had someone like Steve Ishmael or Amba Adetawo who can go win one-on-one against, good ACC players. And they've got an offensive line with a couple of holes. They don't know who their center is going to be. They've shuffled through a couple guys in the spring. Right tackle, definitely an issue. And, their top two guards are guys who've had injury histories. So Schrader, there's questions about him, but there's certainly questions about the receivers in the offensive line too. And, even one really weak link can cripple a passing game.
The O-line was certainly a continuing issue last year. It could take quite a long time to rebuild that. Do you see, in your estimation, any significant difference in quality of play for either the O-line or the receivers this year? Like, is there any real reason to think we're going to see like a lot worse or a lot better?
Well, it really can't get any worse. I don't know so I'll start with the receivers. You've got kind of a mix of veterans who are kind of like low ceiling contributors who you kind of know what you're getting, like Anthony Queeley's a solid possession receiver and a great run blocker, really, really good run blocker. Courtney Jackson's back as a slot receiver who I think can do maybe a little more after the catch, but he's been here a few years. You got young guys like Damian Alford, who came on and started the second half of last year, 6'5" Canadian who can really run. Aronde Gadsden, the second. His father was an NFL receiver for the Dolphins. Someone who was just on the fringe last year who could come in. Amari Hatcher, a second-year receiver. I think there are guys who could emerge, but no one's shown anything in the spring where it's like, oh my God, like this guy is going to be the guy. And Dino Babers has said as much. They don't know who the guy is going to be, and there isn't really anyone who's maybe elevated to take that yet. And, in their defense, they're learning a new offense with a quarterback who was playing wide receiver 2 years ago. So with that, an offensive line that presents issues as well, trying to work vertical passing game. So, I think there's wait and see there. On the offensive line, I think Syracuse has a few really good players. Matthew Bergeron at left tackle is excellent in pass protection, like probably one of the better pass protecting tackles in the ACC. They've got a couple veteran guards in Dakota Davis and Chris Bleich is a Florida transfer who's coming off his latest hip surgery, kind of a guy who, if he's healthy, you maybe have three guys who you really, really like there. And if he's not, I don't know how you're really able to patch it up. And then again, they've got some younger guys who are emerging. Kalen Ellis is a 388-pound Hawaiian guy who moves as well as a fringe 400-pound player. You'll kind of see, I guess, at a school like that. I think they need a grad transfer or a high-level transfer to play tackle or center. And then you've kind of got a couple of older, versatile guys who are good, but again, ceiling capped. They're gonna need help against really good ACC pass rushers or defensive tackles.
By the way, having done a lot of these now, every single school is looking for a grad transfer offensive tackle. So,
it would be nice, yeah.
Yeah. Those guys seem to get their NIL taken care of, and they don't tend to leave schools if they're pretty good.
Yep.
So most of our time we used on the offense here. I do have a couple questions about the defense. Still running the 3-3-5, still should be a solid defense at the very least. Linebacker and DB should still be pretty damn good unless I'm missing something, right? Like everybody's back and they were pretty solid last year.
Linebacker and corner should be great. I mean, they got 5 guys who are at the very least in NFL conversations, which for Syracuse is as good as it gets.
Anybody new that we need to know about in the back end there, like back 7?
Yeah.
Elijah
Clark, a safety transfer from Rutgers. He started maybe like half the season as a true freshman last year and then had some kind of lower body injury. So he hasn't really been able to mix in much in the spring. They had their spring game last week and it's like 2/3 of the way through the spring and he dressed, but wasn't ready to go live yet. So I think once he's fully in the mix, he's someone who'll compete for snaps. And then Braylon Oliver is another second-year transfer from Louisville who did not play last year. he's going to mix in as well. I'm not sure if he'll end up being a guy right away, but I think his range makes him someone who down the road is someone who could contribute. I mean, the real focus of the defense is going to be on the front three for the offseason.
I'm glad you went there. So everybody who had 250 plus snaps on the defensive line last year is gone, right?
Yep.
How's this going to look?
Yeah, I mean, the spring was kind of like, it's like that meme with the dog in the burning building, and everyone's like, oh, this is fine. I'm like looking at these guys, and I'm like, what do you mean this is fine? Like, your starting defensive tackle is a second-year guy who for a true freshman defensive tackle in the ACC did well, but, he didn't have a redshirt year. He didn't have a year, to focus on his strength and conditioning. He was learning the 3-3-5. Yeah, Terry Lockett. Yeah, Terry Lockett. He had to play. You got Caleb Okechukwu, who's a fourth or fifth-year guy, who has played, who you can rely on a little bit. And then the most interesting piece in the defensive line room is Steve Lynn, who is also, I believe, a fourth-year guy who's like 6'5", incredible speed, great pass rusher, but he's trying to put on weight to get to 240 pounds. How is that going to work? How are they going to be able to move him around to keep him off blocks where the linebackers can flow and tackle? And it's just like, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to work. They're definitely going to bring in at least one transfer. But after that, you've got a bunch of guys who haven't played. You got a handful of second-year linemen who redshirted and were in a strength program, and everyone says are going to be great, but they haven't played college football before. And the guys who have played haven't, like you said, they haven't crossed the 250 snap threshold. They haven't been key contributors. They lost their 5 best, most heavily played linemen from last year. I don't know how you fix that.
Yeah, and so obviously we talk a lot of betting on cover 3 at times. Yeah. Like this is an area I'm going to circle. If you never hope for injuries, obviously. If they catch early injuries, this is a spot where it really could spiral. It looks like. I mean, you're dipping down into true freshmen / walk-ons. I would suspect, or guys playing pretty out of position.
I mean, there are a number of scholarship first and second year players. Jatius Gee or Elijah Fuentes-Cundiff and Chase Simmons all redshirted last year. They've got a couple guys who are early enrollees, and Dennis Jackson and Francois Knowlton. There is a walk-on in the mix in Kayvon Darton who may play. But you're certainly talking about inexperienced guys, scholarship guys, but inexperienced guys, many of whom maybe haven't even played in odd fronts all that often. So there's going to be in positions that they're not even that familiar with.
Sure. Stephen Bailey of Cuse on 24/7. You can follow him on Twitter at Stephen with the PH _Bailey1. That's Stephen _Bailey1. Really appreciate the time, man. I don't think we're getting breakdowns of Syracuse football anywhere else, and I'm really glad to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much, bud. I really appreciate it.
All right, take care, buddy. All right, that's the bell. Cover 3 College Football Summer School is over for today, but don't worry. We'll be back soon with even more episodes filling you in on the top teams in college football. Please give us those 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Follow us on YouTube and on Twitter at Cover 3 Podcast, and we'll see you all soon.